Staying healthy, staying sexy, staying young is what living life is all about. And if you have doctors that have proven treatments that keep people young and healthy so they don't get sick, you want people to know about these treatments and that they exist.
This podcast is brought to you by Gainswave. Gainswave is a treatment done at your doctor's office to optimize erection quality without the needs of Viagra, Cialis. It's non-surgical, there's no needles, and it has an amazing success rate. To find a Gainswave provider, go to gainswave.com. That's GAINSWAVE.com. This is Mark White with Health Hacks, and we have Jodi Cohen with Vibrant Blue Oils from Seattle, Washington on with us. Wonderful line of healing oils to treat anything from insomnia to anxiety to depression. You've had that now for a decade, but I know that you've gone through a lot of challenges the last year and a half, and you had to really take all your learning and all your knowledge and all your brains and put it to a test on yourself. How did you tell us about that?
So on August 27th, 2018, my son Max and 3 of his friends went on kind of a last hurrah of summer trip. They were meant to go whitewater rafting in eastern Washington, and en route, they were in a terrible car accident, and my son died instantly. And 2 of his close friends died within the next 3 months of injuries sustained. One boy survived, and his father was driving the car. He's now in prison for that choice. And then 7 months later, my father passed away. And then 2 weeks ago, my closest friend from preschool passed away. And I have a 15-year-old daughter who had lost her brother, her dad, her grandfather, and her auntie, and it was kind of looking at me. You know, I knew all the research about adverse childhood events and how that can really mess people up. But I also knew that if they had one adult in their life that was kind of grounded and helped show the way, they could be okay. So it was very clear to me that I couldn't fall apart, that I needed to find a way not only to navigate this, but to teach her how to do it. And it was a lot of trial and error and a lot of being very open and asking anyone that seemed to have done something similar, what helped you, and then trying it. And, you know, when you're in that kind of pain, that intense pain, like anyone who's navigated chronic pain, if there's something that alleviates that pain, it is so obvious and powerful, and you can feel it so quickly that you notice, oh goodness, that worked. Like, we're going to do that again. And then similarly, if there are things that intensify the pain, it's so obvious in that kind of, I mean, it wasn't life or death, but there were moments that it felt like it. In that kind of intense situation, it becomes very, very clear what works. And the more you can notice, okay, I feel better when I do this, and repeat that, every time you repeat it, it's almost like a default. Like, sometimes, you know, like when kids start high school, they're so overwhelmed because they have so much homework and they don't really have a strategy for tackling it. But once they kind of figure out, like, okay, this is how I deal with this, then every single time it becomes easier. You know, the first time you work out, when you haven't worked out in forever, you're so sore, and then it just keeps getting easier. So that's kind of what I started to navigate and figure out.
I have 3 kids, and first of all, the thought of it just makes me want to cry. It's got to be the most difficult thing in the world, but you never plan for that. So when you talk about strategies, it's like you have to learn that when it happens, because you never think it's going to happen.
No, and I never would. And I haven't found the right language for what I've noticed. Some people call it the gift of grief, but it doesn't really feel like a gift, because I would honestly swap everything I've learned to have one more day with my child, but that's not an option. And so what I'm choosing to do instead, because I think they always want to find a way to honor their children, right? And so some people do like Mothers Against Drug Driving or all these things that are slightly negative. What I would rather do to honor my child is to take all of the gifts that I have learned about how to navigate really challenging situations and share them with other people so that I might be able to minimize their suffering. And that feels like a really lovely way to honor him, because he was really lovely.
I think that's like the memory and cherishing that memory. And I also, like last week, Vanessa Bryant lost her
Yes.
husband and her daughter.
Her 13-year-old daughter.
Her 13-year-old daughter
Was almost 13, yeah.
And I think the saddest part about that was a woman losing her husband, and her daughter, and it happens to suddenly there's other families. Now, if you were able to speak to her, like how does somebody get through that?
Yeah, there are different stages, and the first stage is shock, and it's almost a good thing. You really can't feel certain things because it would be too much for your body. And while you're in shock, what my therapist told me that I loved was, you just need to eat, sleep, and move. That is all you need to do right now, because you just need to, like, every day get up and and in the middle of the night, grief can feel like a heart attack. It can feel like the inability not to breathe, like those grief nighttime wake ups, because in Chinese medicine, they correlate the lungs with grief. And it's the strangest thing. You're not sure if you're having a heart attack or if you just can't breathe and you're suddenly asthmatic, but it's unbelievably intense. And that is where rose essential oil is amazing. And just smelling it and rubbing it over your heart. I noticed that, and then I reverse engineered. There's some interesting research. There's a Nobel laureate researcher out of Seattle. Her name's Linda Buck. And she was looking at the inhalation channel, the olfactory channel, and noticed certain receptors for like predator and fear-based odor. And then she took it one step further and she figured, is there anything that blocks these fear messages? And it's rose. So that whole idea of stopping to smell the roses, there's a lot of merit to that. So if she's having those, like, I don't even know what to call it, like darkest hour of darkest day moments, rose oil is really powerful. And then just not, there's so much, and you just have to take that first step. You cannot do everything in that first moment. So just remembering to eat, sleep, and breathe, because she also has other children who are looking to her as the role model, and they need her to be strong so that they can manage their grief, because if she falls apart, they might as well. And she's got a very young baby, which is a lot.
That's tough. You have your daughter. How old is your daughter? She's
15 now. She was 14 when the accident happened.
How were you there for her? Was like I couldn't imagine, but how do you go on? And
it's so amazing what, like, love is an incredibly powerful motivator, right? And what I would do is I would just decide that she was my priority, and anything that she needed, I was just going to show up. And I mentioned I have an oil called parasympathetic, and what it really does is it gets you in that state of resilience. Like, the way I explain it is, all of us have had that situation where we're driving and someone cuts us off, and for whatever reason, we're fine. We're like, whatever. We like the song on the radio. Maybe they're in a hurry. Like, it really doesn't faze us. We're totally okay with it. And then other days, someone cuts us off, and before we know it, 4-letter words are falling out of our mouth. And the only difference is kind of the state we were in that moment, how resilient we were. And when you're more resilient, it's easier. People can cut you off. It can snow and your plans can get canceled. All these external things that you have no control over can kind of happen, and you're okay because you're in a solid place, so it doesn't throw you. And so what I would do with my daughter, for me, exercising puts me in a solid place. And so I knew that about myself. That's the move piece. So every day I would either go running, walk my dog, do yoga, do something before she got up, so that my needs were met and I was able to be there for her in the best possible way. And then I would really try, if, teenagers, they have a reputation for, okay, boomering you or not necessarily being the kindest. And so I would never let that offend me. I would just kind of roll with it and just try to be as supportive as I could be. And I found other resources for her. I mean, I just decided it was my mission to kind of be as solid and grounded as I could, so that she could just dump everything on me, and I would carry that.
How, I would assume that you had a lot of anger towards your ex-husband, or
Everyone
like,
assumes that, but that wasn't really. So here's what's interesting. Anger is really correlated with your liver and your gallbladder. And I'm an Ashkenazic Jew, which means my liver is kind of, there's a reason Ashkenazic Jews eat like, liver and organ meat and all these foods that support the liver, because I think we're challenged. So no, I never really went to anger, because I knew it was an accident. I went to compassion. And that's the other thing that I noticed, the historical grief model has a lot of anger and blame and bargaining and all these things, that every time I did that, or I'd try to rewrite the day, oh, if only I had called him, if only I had, I would just feel awful. It's almost like, the rats in the mazes, they pretty quickly deduce when I turn left, it's a dead end. I'm not going to do that again. So no, and I'm grateful for that, because I don't think, I know his dad. I know this was an accident. I know this was not his intention. So there was no, if maybe there was like some magic deal I could have created where it would bring him back to life, maybe I would have chosen that. But that was kind of a dead end and a no-win for me. So no, I didn't really get that angry.
So the appreciation of life, the stuff you've learned going through that, I think having the 8 years of knowing about oils and how those essential oils pulling you through that
yeah,
it's fascinating.
I was well resourced, I guess is the best way to say it.
And you had some great support people. Who helped you the most get through this dark time?
My friend Christine Schaffner, who is an amazing practitioner, she was actually there that day. She drove me to. It was horrific the way I found out. I got a phone call, and I was actually on a video call for work, and they said, we're investigating a vehicular homicide, which was a vocabulary word I wasn't yet familiar with. And then they didn't really know. One child died on the scene, and it wasn't clear which one it was. And so there was I was texting them photos. I was getting in touch with the other families, and they were basically saying the 3 living boys were transported to this hospital. Go there and figure out if your kid's the dead one. And so she drove me to the hospital, giving me rescue remedy, Bach flower essences the entire way. Grief for me, the initial stages of grief and shock were, I felt really nauseous. And so she just kind of validated that's normal. That, that's pretty common. She helped me. There were other practitioners. It's interesting. One of the reasons that I started this oil company is that because I'm a slow methylator, I do not respond well to pharmaceutical drugs. They tend to stay in my system too long and have kind of adverse effects. So several people were trying to get me sleeping pills and things that I just knew weren't the right fit. Christine showed up. We live in Washington State where CBD is legal, with a CBD oil for me. So that was very helpful. And just, having someone who, she's just a great listener. She's an amazing human being.
It's great that you have the support system. Have you, and I know you lost your father months later, you lost your friend, but has that experience allowed you to help other people who are going through those types of tragedies?
That's my goal. That's what I ultimately want to do. And it's interesting because I've been workshopping it in my head. This is the first time I've kind of publicly talked about it. I do feel like the more time and space I have between the actual tragedy and now, the more I can kind of delineate what has helped me and articulate it. Like, I don't know if you've ever had the experience with your 3 children. I love to ski. I'm a fantastic skier. But when it was time to teach my own children how to ski, it was very hard for me to delineate exactly what I was doing and how I was doing it. And so that process of figuring out what works for you and then having the time, space, and distance to get really clear and lay it out in a strategy that you can then share with others is a process that I'm in right now.
I think that's going to be an awesome way to honor Max. it's hard for me to talk. I mean, it's got to be just crushing to think about this.
It is, but you know what's interesting is that I couldn't have said this at the time when it first happened, but in the weirdest way, pain is the most intense transformation, because when you're in pain, you can't stay in pain. And so you have to find a way to move through and move out. And so in some ways, you grow and evolve faster in these horrible, horrible times. I would never call it a blessing. I haven't yet figured out, like, for example, what term I want to apply to it. But pain is an opportunity for transformation, and it happens much faster. So I would honestly say that I don't actually think I'm the same person I was when he was alive, because I've had to. I mean, I'll just give you an example. People show up, and some of them have their own agendas, and I didn't really know that. And so you have to be very clear in yourself and your own boundaries. For example, this concept of personal responsibility. There were areas of my business that I didn't know what to do, so I kind of wasn't really showing up, and I was letting other people on my team handle that, and that wasn't very helpful for them. So I've become very clear, if something is my responsibility, like my daughter is 100% my responsibility, my company, I show up. I am on. I own everything. If a mistake happens, it's my mistake. And then there are other people in my life that have abdicated their responsibility, or, shame, blame, guilt. Those are all ways of kind of shifting responsibility. If you're blaming somebody else, you're not really choosing responsibility for yourself. So I chose to let my son drive with his dad that day. That was my choice. So I can't really blame his dad, because I could have made different choices. I always have different options. And so that's something that I never, had to really look at before and delineate and get really clear about.
I think when somebody plays the victim game, whatever it is, whether it's your business or personal life, when you play that victim game, first of all, it's so easy to fall into that drama, but once you're there, it's hard to pull yourself out of it. So I'm a big believer in creating your own destiny and just being resilient. I think great entrepreneurs are resilient. And my dad passed away when I was 21 years old, suddenly. And I remember it was just like the little stuff that wasn't important anymore. Just wasn't. Petty stuff.
Yeah. It really does feel like it's a very weird way to do it, but I've decluttered my life considerably, because it's been so obvious to me what's important, what I value, and so obvious to me what I don't. And so it's become very clean and clear when people make requests. And I used to play that game of like, oh, I don't want to hurt their feelings. Oh, I want to be polite. And I've realized that I can be direct and be clear and be honest. And I'm not trying to hurt their feelings. If they choose to let their feelings be hurt because I said I don't think it's a fit, then that they get to take responsibility for that. But it's really allowed me to put I have limited energy. I get to really channel it where it's the most productive and the most aligned with what I want to do.
That's amazing. What could anybody do to honor your son? Did you ever do a foundation or anything to cherish his memory?
That's a lovely question. There's been so much. There were a lot of legal things. There was a lot of undesirable things that I had to kind of navigate. So I haven't gotten to put energy into that. But let me think about that and loop back to you. I guess the one way that I would like people to honor my son is to honor themselves and to really get clear on their own personal responsibility, because I think the more that people can kind of show up in their integrity and not in victim, the easier we'll all get along.
Jodi, you're an amazing person. I really feel that just talking through this. You've been through a lot of challenges. You're an entrepreneur at heart. You have something that helps thousands and thousands of people. You're writing a book with all of this going on. It's amazing. It's amazing. You're an inspiration.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that's really what I've noticed is that if you can, the more you can engage like the frontal part of your brain through focus, through doing something scary, through doing something different, the more you kind of get out of this fear part of your brain called the amygdala. And so that's why I'm writing the book. That's why I'm a natural introvert. being on podcasts is out of my comfort zone. So I'm really trying to, and my son was fearless, like so brave in ways that I would love to embody. So I'm really trying to do that now in his memory.
So being brave is honoring. That's awesome. I really respect that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for opening up.
Thank you.
Here.